My mother poured herself a glass of wine at 2 in the afternoon, looked me dead in the eyes across the kitchen island, and said, "Tessa, your brother needs this house more than you do. So I need you out by the end of the month." She said it the way she said everything that was going to hurt me, with a slight tilt of her head and a small smile, as if she were offering me helpful advice I should be grateful for. I was holding a bag of groceries I had just carried in from the car. Her groceries. The ones I bought every Thursday because she said her knees were too bad for the Loblaws parking lot, but apparently not too bad for her Tuesday evening line dancing class. I set the bag on the counter. I didn't say anything right away because there was a specific kind of math I had learned to do in my head whenever my mother dropped something like this on me. The math went, is this worth a fight? What will the fight cost? What will silence cost? And the answer, as it had been for most of my 29 years, was that the fight would cost more because she would find a way to make me the villain no matter what I said. "Did you hear me?" she asked, and took a sip of her wine like she was punctuating the sentence. "I heard you," I said. "Good. Because Derek and the kids are coming from Sudbury on the 15th, and I want the upstairs bedroom cleared out. He's going through a lot right now, and the last thing he needs is to feel like there's no room for him in his own family home." His own family home. I let that phrase sit between us for a moment. Then I unpacked the groceries, put the milk in the fridge, folded the reusable bags, and walked upstairs to my room without another word. My father was in the garage. I could hear the radio playing through the wall. He was always in the garage when my mother made her announcements. I had stopped believing that was a coincidence around the time I turned 20. What my mother did not know, what she had never once thought to ask about, was that the house she had just told me to vacate, the 3-bedroom bungalow on Cedarview Crescent in Barrie, Ontario, with the cracked driveway and the kitchen my father had half renovated in 2019 before losing interest, was mine. My name on the title, my mortgage payments for the past 2.5 years, every single one. But I need to go back further than that afternoon, because my mother's casual cruelty in the kitchen did not come out of nowhere. It was the product of nearly 3 decades of a family system that had one rule above all others: Derek comes first. My brother is 4 years older than me. Growing up in Barrie, he was the kid everyone noticed. He played rep hockey, and my parents drove him to tournaments across Ontario every winter weekend while I stayed with my grandmother, or, when she wasn't available, simply stayed home alone starting from when I was 11. My parents paid for Derek's 4 years at Western without hesitation. They remortgaged the house to do it, actually, which is a detail that becomes important later. When it was my turn for university, my mother sat me down, same kitchen island, same tilt of the head, and explained that they simply couldn't afford to help me the way they had helped Derek. "But you're resourceful, Tessa. You always have been." Resourceful. That was the word she used instead of "on your own." I went to the University of Ottawa on OSAP loans and worked 25 hours a week at a call center near Rideau. I graduated with a degree in accounting, articled at a mid-sized firm, got my CPA designation, and moved back to Barrie at 25 because rent in Ottawa was becoming impossible on a junior accountant's salary, and my parents had offered me the upstairs bedroom. "Just until you get on your feet," my mother had said, and I had believed her because I still believed, at 25, that she meant the things she said. 4 years later, I was still in that bedroom. Not because I couldn't leave. By then I was earning decent money at a firm in Barrie. But because the house needed me in ways my parents never acknowledged out loud. My father had been laid off from the auto parts plant in Innisfil in 2020, and had been picking up contract work since then. My mother worked part-time at a medical clinic. Between the two of them, they covered about 60% of what it actually cost to run that house. I covered the rest. The hydro bill was in my name. I paid the property tax every year because the first year I moved back, my father had quietly admitted he was behind on it. I replaced the furnace when it died in February of 2022. $7,000 I put on a line of credit I had opened specifically for that purpose. None of this was ever discussed at the dinner table. My mother had a talent for absorbing financial help the way the ground absorbs rain, silently, completely, and with no apparent memory that it had happened. Meanwhile, Derek had moved to Sudbury with his wife, had 2 kids, gotten promoted at Vail, and existed in my mother's mind as a kind of golden figure who could do no wrong. When he visited at Thanksgiving, my mother cooked for 2 days. When I came downstairs on a Tuesday morning, she asked me if I was ever going to stop leaving my shoes by the front door. This is the context for what happened next. In the fall of 2023, my father came to me on a Saturday morning. My mother was at her sister's in Aurelia for the weekend. He sat on the edge of my bed, which he hadn't done since I was a child, and he looked at his hands the way men of his generation look at their hands when they're about to say something that embarrasses them, and he told me that the house was in serious trouble. The second mortgage they had taken out to pay for Derek's education, the one I had suspected existed but never confirmed, had ballooned. They had been making interest-only payments for years, and the bank had notified them that the outstanding principal was now due under the terms of the loan. The amount was $94,000. They did not have it. They did not have anything close to it. If they couldn't resolve it, the bank would begin foreclosure proceedings, and given the current rates and the equity situation, there was a real chance they would lose the house entirely. My father cried. I had never seen him cry before, not at his mother's funeral, not when he lost his job, not once. He sat on the edge of my bed in a house that smelled like the coffee I had made an hour earlier, and he cried and he said, "Don't tell your mother how bad it is. She'll fall apart." I didn't cry. I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and started working through the numbers. Here's what I did over the next 3 months, and I want to be specific because I know some people will hear this and wonder how a 27-year-old accountant manages something like this. The answer is that I didn't manage it easily. I had saved roughly $52,000 over the 4 years I had been living at home, largely because my rent was minimal, and I am, by nature and by training, someone who tracks every dollar. I had also been doing contract bookkeeping work on evenings and weekends for 2 small businesses in the area, which brought in an additional $15,000 to $20,000 a year that I had been putting directly into a TFSA and a high-interest savings account. I contacted the bank myself. I came with a repayment proposal, documentation of my income and assets, and a clear plan. I negotiated the outstanding amount down to $81,000. The bank was motivated to avoid the cost and timeline of foreclosure, which gave me leverage. I paid $52,000 from my savings, took a personal line of credit for the remaining $29,000, and made a deal with my father. I would clear the debt completely if the title was transferred to me. He agreed, not reluctantly. He agreed with something that looked like relief. We went to a real estate lawyer in Barrie, signed the paperwork, and the title was transferred to my name in January 2024. My mother was not told because my father asked me not to tell her, and because, if I am being honest, some part of me already knew that this information in her hands would become a weapon pointed at me. So for 2.5 years, I owned the house I lived in with my parents. I continued to pay the mortgage, the property tax, the insurance. I continued to buy groceries. I continued to live in the upstairs bedroom, while my mother continued to treat me as though I were a 20-year-old who hadn't figured out how to launch. And I said nothing, because the alternative was a confrontation I wasn't ready for, and this is the part that's hardest to explain, I still wanted her to see me on her own, without being forced. I wanted her to look at me one day and recognize what I had done and what I was doing, without me having to hold up a deed and say, "Look, that never happened." Instead, she told me to leave so Derek could move in. I want to tell you about Priya, because she is the reason I handled the next part the way I did instead of the way I might have otherwise. Priya Chakraborty has been my closest friend since first year at Ottawa. She's a family lawyer in Toronto now, and she is the kind of person who listens to everything you say, asks one question, and that question rearranges your entire understanding of the situation. I called her from a Tim Hortons parking lot 40 minutes after my mother told me to leave. I was sitting in my car with the engine running and the heat on, and I was not crying, but I was very close, and I told her everything. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Tessa, do you understand that she just tried to evict you from your own property?" I know. No, I mean legally. She has no standing to tell you to leave. You have every legal right to walk back in there and tell her that you own that house, and she can either accept that or she can find somewhere else to live. I knew she was right. I had known it while I was standing in the kitchen, watching my mother drink wine at 2 in the afternoon. But knowing something and being ready to act on it are 2 different countries, and the border between them is built out of every time your mother made you feel like you didn't deserve the space you took up. "I know," I said again. "Then why did you leave?" And I didn't have an answer for that, which was itself the answer. I stayed at Priya's sister's condo in Newmarket that night. Priya's sister was traveling for work and had given me the code. I lay on a couch that smelled like someone else's fabric softener, and I stared at the ceiling, and I did the thing I always did when my family hurt me, which was to replay every moment, looking for the version of events where I was the one who had done something wrong. I couldn't find it. For the first time, I genuinely could not find the angle where this was my fault, and that absence was both freeing and terrifying. My father called at 6 in the morning. I let it ring 4 times before I picked up. Tessa. His voice was thin in the way it got when he knew he was on the wrong side of something. Your mother found the deed. How? She was cleaning out the filing cabinet. She wanted to find the insurance papers because the basement had some water after the rain last week, and she found the title documents. Tessa, she doesn't understand. She says there's been a mistake. There's no mistake, Dad. You were there when we signed the papers. I know. But she's saying you pressured me. She's saying I was vulnerable and you took advantage. I listened to the words coming out of his mouth and I recognized them immediately. Those were not his words. Those were her words coming through his voice, which is how most things worked in that house. My father was a good man in many individual moments, but he had long ago surrendered his opinions to whoever was most certain in the room, and my mother was always the most certain person in any room she entered. Dad, I saved that house from foreclosure. I paid $81,000 of debt that you and Mom created. The title transfer was legal, it was documented, and it was your idea. I'm not going to apologize for any of that. He was quiet. Then, she wants to talk to you. I'm sure she does. My mother called 20 minutes later. I was making coffee in Priya's sister's kitchen, moving through the motions of a morning routine in someone else's space, and when I saw her name on the screen, I let it ring twice, took a breath, and answered. She did not start with hello. She started in the middle of a fury that had clearly been building since the moment she opened that filing cabinet. She told me that I had gone behind her back. She told me that I had manipulated my father during a difficult time. She told me that no decent daughter would do what I had done. She used the word sneaky, which was a word she had been applying to me since I was a child and which had always meant the same thing. You did something I didn't control, and I can't forgive that. I let her go. Priya had told me once that the most powerful thing you can do in a conversation with someone who is trying to overwhelm you is to simply wait, because the silence after their storm is where the truth lives. So I waited. I drank my coffee. I heard her breathing change as the adrenaline started to fade. Mom, I said, when the pause was long enough, you were 2 months away from losing that house. You and Dad. The bank was going to foreclose. Dad came to me because there was nobody else to come to. Not Derek, who was in Sudbury pretending this family didn't have problems. Not Aunt Claire. Not anyone. Me. I paid it off. The title is mine. That is not sneaky. That is what happened. She tried to rally. Your father would never have agreed to that if he was thinking clearly. Dad was thinking clearly enough to sign legal documents in front of a lawyer. This is not a conversation about whether the transfer is valid, Mom. It is. You can call every lawyer in Simcoe County, and they will all tell you the same thing. I heard a sound that might have been a sharp breath or might have been something breaking behind her composure, and then the line went quiet. Not dead. I could hear the kitchen clock ticking in the background, which meant she was standing exactly where she had been 2 days earlier when she called me a burden and told me to leave. The irony of her standing in my kitchen calling me sneaky was not lost on me, but I didn't say it out loud, because point scoring was her game, not mine. What happened over the next several days was a cascade of phone calls that I later described to Priya as the family telephone tree of guilt. My mother called her sister Claire in Aurelia. Aunt Claire called my father's brother, Uncle Ron, in Bracebridge. Uncle Ron called me on a Wednesday evening while I was eating leftover pasta and watching the news, and he started the conversation with, "Now, Tessa, I don't know all the details, but family property is a complicated thing. And maybe there's a way to sort this out so everyone feels okay about it." I explained the situation calmly. The near foreclosure, the payment, the legal transfer. I explained it without anger, without self-pity, and without apology, because I had done nothing that required an apology, and I was finished performing guilt to make other people comfortable. Uncle Ron, to his credit, was quiet for a while after I finished. Then he said, "I didn't know it was that bad with the mortgage. Nobody did, because nobody asked." Derek called on a Thursday afternoon. I was at my desk at work and I saw his name on my phone and I felt something tighten in my chest that I recognized as the old reflex. The one that braced itself whenever my brother entered a conversation, because his attention, rare as it was, always came with a cost. He opened with warmth. He always opened with warmth. "Tess, hey, listen. I know things have been really stressful with Mom and Dad, and I just want you to know I think what Mom said to you is totally out of line. The whole parasite things, or whatever she called it." "She didn't call me a parasite," I said. She told me to leave and said you needed the house more than I did. Right, and that's not cool. I told her that. But listen, here's what I'm thinking. You've got a good job, you're single, you've got way more flexibility than I do right now. Mel and I are separating, the kids are struggling, and I really need a stable place for them. So what if you found a place of your own? You'd probably love having your own apartment, honestly, and the kids and I could take the house for a while. It makes sense for everyone. I let him finish. I had learned from years of practice to let Derek finish his entire pitch before responding, because if you interrupted him, he would simply restart from a different angle, and you would end up listening to the same argument twice. Derek, I said, you're asking me to move out of a house I own so you can move in. I want you to hear yourself say that. A pause. What do you mean a house you own? I own the house, Derek. My name is on the title. It has been since January 2024. I paid off the second mortgage, the one you've apparently never asked about. And Dad transferred the property to me. The silence that followed was different from any silence Derek had ever produced in my presence. It was not the silence of someone preparing his next charming maneuver. It was the silence of someone whose map of the world had just been revealed to be missing an entire continent. Dad wouldn't do that without telling Mom. He did. Because if he had told Mom, she would have found a way to stop it, and then you would all be homeless right now because the bank would have taken the house. That is not a hypothetical. That is what was going to happen. Derek didn't have a follow-up. My brother, who had been handed a script for every situation since birth, the charming son, the reasonable one, the one whose needs were always just slightly more urgent than anyone else's, did not have a line for this scene. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I went back to the house on a Saturday. Not to perform anything. Not to deliver a speech I had rehearsed in the mirror, though I won't pretend I hadn't run through various versions in my head while lying on Priya's sister's couch. I went back because it was my house, and because I had spent my whole life vacating spaces to make room for other people's comfort, and I was finished. My mother was at the kitchen island when I walked in. She was not drinking wine. She was sitting with her hands flat on the counter, and she looked like she had not slept well, which was something I recognized because I had looked the same way many times, and nobody in that house had ever noticed. My father was at the table. He stood up when I came in, then sat back down, then stood up again, which was the physical language of a man who wanted to do the right thing, but could not figure out where the right thing was in the room. Nobody spoke first, so I did. I'm going to say this once, and I need both of you to listen to the whole thing before you respond. My mother opened her mouth. My father put his hand on her arm. She closed it. That was the first time I had ever seen him do that. This house was 2 months from foreclosure in 2023. Dad came to me because there was no one else. Not Derek, not Uncle Ron, not Aunt Claire. Me. I paid $81,000 to clear the debt. That money came from savings I built over 4 years while living in this house, buying groceries, paying the hydro, paying the property tax, and replacing the furnace, none of which anyone in this family has ever acknowledged. The title transfer was legal, voluntary, and documented. It is not a mistake. It is not up for discussion. I paused. My mother was looking at the counter. My father was looking at me. I am not going to remove you from this house. I am not cruel, even though cruelty is what I have been shown most of my life in this family. But I have 3 conditions. First, Derek is welcome to visit. He is not moving in. This is my house and I decide who lives here. Second, every financial contribution I have made to this household, the hydro, the taxes, the furnace, the groceries, every dollar, is acknowledged. Not repaid, acknowledged, out loud, by both of you. Today. Third, if I ever hear the implication, from either of you, that I am a burden, a freeloader, or someone who doesn't deserve to be here, I will begin the process of selling this property within the week. And you can explain to Derek why his childhood home is on the market. The kitchen was very quiet. The fridge hummed. The furnace I had paid for clicked on in the basement. My father spoke first. He said, "Tessa, you saved this house, and I should have told your mother what you did from the beginning. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not saying anything, and I'm sorry for every time I sat in that garage and let things happen that I shouldn't have let happen." It was the most words I had heard my father string together in years, and I believed every one of them because they cost him something to say. My mother took longer. She sat at that counter, and she went through something internal that I could see on her face. A kind of rearranging, like someone picking up furniture after a storm. When she finally looked at me, her eyes were wet, and I knew the difference between her performed tears and real ones, because I had been studying that difference since I was old enough to understand that my mother's emotions often served a strategic purpose. These were real. I didn't know about the mortgage, she said. Your father didn't tell me. I know he didn't. I should have asked. I should have asked about a lot of things. She paused. You paid for the furnace? Yes, and the property tax? Every year since I moved back. She looked at the counter again. Then she said, I have treated you like you were temporary in this house when you were the one keeping it standing. I don't have a good reason for that. I don't think there is one. That was not a full apology. It was not the sweeping acknowledgement of 30 years of favoritism and dismissal. But it was more than she had ever given me, and I recognized it for what it was. The sound of a wall developing its first crack. Walls don't come down all at once. I had learned that from working with financial systems that people had neglected for years. You don't fix everything in one meeting. You establish what's true, you set the terms, and you show up again tomorrow. Derek found a rental in Sudbury. His separation from Mel went through, and he worked out a custody arrangement that did not require him to displace his sister from her own home. He called me a few weeks later and said, I had no idea about any of the money stuff, Tess. I believed him, which was its own kind of sad, because it meant that he had spent his entire adult life so insulated from this family's reality that he hadn't even known the house was in danger. That's what being the favorite does to you. It doesn't make you evil, it makes you blind. My mother and I are not suddenly close. I want to be honest about that. We eat dinner together most nights, and the conversation is careful in a way it never was before, which I think is actually an improvement, because before, the carelessness was the point. She has started asking about my work, which she never did when she assumed I was just an accountant, killing time before my real life started. Last month, she told one of her friends on the phone that I was very good with finances, which I overheard from the hallway, and which I did not comment on but which I noted internally as progress. My father fixed the crack in the driveway. I don't know if that was a metaphor or just a chore he'd been avoiding, but I appreciated it either way. Priya came up from Toronto for a weekend, and we sat on the back deck with a bottle of wine, and she said, How does it feel? I thought about it. The yard needed work. The eavesdrows were sagging on the east side. There was a list in my phone of things that needed attention, the way there always is when you own a home, and for the first time that list felt like mine in a way that wasn't heavy. It was just mine. It feels solid, I said, like standing on ground that actually belongs to me. She raised her glass. About time. I repainted the upstairs hallway the next weekend. My mother had kept it beige for 15 years because she said colors were too risky for a hallway. I painted it a deep blue-green that reminded me of Lake Simcoe on a clear morning, and when she walked past it for the first time, she stopped and looked at it for a long moment and said, I wouldn't have chosen that. I know, I said. She looked at it a bit longer. It's nice, though. Every morning I make coffee in that kitchen. I sit at the island where my mother once told me to leave, and I drink it while it's warm, and I don't rush. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button right now, because every week we bring you real stories about people who stayed quiet, stood firm, and changed everything without raising their voice. You don't want to miss what's coming next.